us this morning to our class in Bible prophecy. Today we're going to continue on with talking about the millennial reign of Christ, and we're going to go back and talk a little bit more about the 75-day preparation for the millennium. Now, I have a handout for my class here, and it shows some of the events of the millennium. So, a picture will help you understand a little bit more. Now, what about the 75 days that we're talking about here? From the time that Jesus returns to the earth from heaven with the church, his wife, and all the armies of heaven. That's in Revelation chapter 19. And we've read about it. We talk about him destroying all the armies of the Antichrist and all those that were in the battle of Armageddon. And then he cast the beast, the false prophet, into the bottomless, or into the lake of fire. And then in chapter 20 of Revelation, we see that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years in the bottomless pit during the millennial reign of Christ. But let's talk about, in Daniel, it said that there are 75 days before, from the time that he returns and to the beginning of the millennial reign of Christ. Now, I'll tell you this, as I've talked to you before, that about 80% of the churches in America, denominational churches, don't believe that there's a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on the earth. They believe we are in the kingdom age now. But I can just punch holes all the way through that doctrine. First of all, Satan is not bound in the bottomless pit. Secondly, the world isn't getting better. It seems like every day I see it, it's getting worse. So all these things. You know that taking away the millennial reign of Christ started way back in the time of Augustine and Origen and then Jerome. And they took it away, and they predicted that the end would come around 600 A.D. And when the 600 A.D. didn't happen, then they moved it to the 1,000 years. Then when it didn't happen in the 1,000 years, then they said, well, it's a spiritual kingdom and it can come, anytime. And well, that's what we've been believing anyway. But it's not a spiritual kingdom. It's going to be a literal kingdom on the earth for 1,000 years, and that's when the Jews will inherit their kingdom. When Jesus came and offered them the kingdom, and they refused it. God didn't do away with their covenants and didn't do away with the kingdom. He postponed it. So the kingdom to the Jewish people is in postponement, at which time they will receive their 1,000-year reign. Now, it just so happens, since we are believers and grafted in to Israel, we will be participants of the 1,000-year reign. And we will be in glorified spiritual bodies, ruling and reigning with him. So let's look at I'm just going to give you this here. Where the 75 days comes from is over in Daniel chapter 12. And I'll just give you the scriptures and you can read through them yourselves. Starting about Daniel 12:11 and then 12. And it talks about a time of 30 days and then 45 days. Now, this is what we believe. At the end of the 70th week of Daniel being completed, which is the second coming of Christ, the end of the tribulation, and the stopping of the battle of Armageddon, it will take, because Jesus is going to build a new millennial temple. And that millennial temple will be in use for that 1,000-year reign on the earth. Jesus will build that temple. And there will be a cleansing of the temple for about 30 days. And then, following that, there'll be the judgment of the nations. Now, you probably heard about that in Matthew 25. the sheep and goat nation judgments. So you'll see here on your handout, right here, this one here, I have a picture of it. It shows you what will happen during that period of time. The judgment of the Gentile nations. And then, let's see, I had another one over here. Key events of the millennium. I'll not get into that right now. Yeah, that's millennium. There'll be 75 days from the time that the second coming until he takes the throne of David officially and begins the 1,000-year reign. So there will be an interval there. You know, until I started studying Bible prophecy, I never knew there was anything about an interval. I didn't even know anything about a 75-day interval. And then once the judgment of the nations occurs, and that is the sheep and goat nations, then he'll set up the kingdom. So I'm going to read some things to you from Dr. Eisen LaHaye's book. Very little has been written about who populates the millennial kingdom. But it's highly significant because we need to know. Few people will actually be left on the earth in the transition from the tribulation into the millennium. And I'll read why. The low number of people is easy to understand when you consider that possibly 500 million Christians or more will be raptured before the tribulation. Well, I think that's a low number. I think it's going to be probably in the almost 2 billion or 2.5 billion. Because we got 3.2 billion on the earth right now. And when they wrote this book, it was not that many. But now we're projected out at 3 point. Right now, if you go to the Bible Encyclopedia, you'll read, you can find the numbers, and it's 3.2 billion. Now, not all of those are what we call true confessing Christians, but there's a lot of professings. So let's just say if you took 3/4 of them, that's 2.5 billion. So if in one swoop God comes down and takes the whole church out of the earth, then that's your population is going to decrease by almost 3 billion, 2.5, 3 billion people. So they'll be gone. Now, what about all the others that are left? Well, things are going to be, it's going to be times are going to be hard. Because we read in the seal judgments, just in the first 4 seal judgments, not seal, but the seal judgment, where 1/4 of the entire population of the earth dies. And that is the pale horse. Remember, there's a white horse, the red horse, which is war. The black horse is famine, and then the pale horse is death and famine. And it says 1/4 of the entire population dies during that time. And then what about the Antichrist? When he institutes his mark of the beast policies, and you have to take the mark of the beast or you die. So let's look at that. So after the rapture, over half of the world's population will be killed during the seal and trumpet judgments. And that's in Revelation 6, 8, and also Revelation 9, 18, which take place during the first half of the 7-year tribulation. Many more will be killed during the other plagues or judgments. Millions of believers will be martyred by the Antichrist for refusing to worship him and take the mark of the beast. And then there are the Gentiles who are cast into everlasting punishment. Now you can see there on your handout here, you see where they go? Down here. See this chart here? I think the world, particularly right now, doesn't believe in a judgment. The way people are living, the emphasis every day on earthly things constantly. Who's going to be running for president? Who's going to be running? Who cares? That's all temporal. The thing that you better be concerned about is what is eternal. Eternal judgment. Eternal rewards. Things that last for eternity, because our bodies are temporal. We're only here for a short period of time. All the things that God gives you in that period of time are temporal. They will go away. They pass away. And if you ever had a mother or grandmother or father, when they pass away, what do you do with all their stuff? Estate sales. You know, their stuff, all their stuff, what was so precious to them, to most people, is just junk to me. You know, you go in and pick out a few things, and you keep it as a keepsake, but what about all their furniture and all their stuff and you clothes, and you go in there and you say, God, what am I going to do with all this? So what I'm saying is it's all temporal. We're not taking anything with us. The only thing that counts is what did you do for Jesus here on this earth for eternity? Well, during the tribulation period, there are going to be all those Gentile nations that are going to be declared as goat nations that are going to be sent to the lake of fire at that judgment. Now, you might, let's just go to Matthew 25, and I want you to read this. If you know, a lot of times we study over here in the Gospels, and we read things and we don't really understand, when is this going to happen? When is this, when's this going to happen? So let's go to 25, verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels, holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. Now, what is the throne of his glory? That's David's throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on the right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundations of the world. And then look at verse 35. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. And I was a stranger, and you took me in. Now, I know that a lot of preachers use this as, social justice and all this stuff. But what this really is talking about is how the Jews are treated during the tribulation period. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. And I was in prison, and you came to me. Of course, we are to visit prisoners. We are to take care of the sick. We're to do all that. But these scriptures are pertaining to the Jewish people. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did you see us hungry and feed you, and thirsty and gave you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and take you in, and naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to him, Surely I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren. Now underline that. My brethren are Jews. You did it to me. Then he will also say on the left hand, Depart from you, cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Well, now I heard a preacher one time preaching, and I heard it. His local guy here in town was preaching that there is no hell. That's for humans. It's only for the devil and the angels. Everybody went, what? What do you mean? Well, the hell was prepared for the devil and the angels, but since man was so evil, that's where they go. Mankind goes there too. And remember, there's different abodes of hell. There is Sheol, or Hades, and then there is Gehenna, which is a lake of fire. And then there's another one called Tartarus. Now, Tartarus is where the angels that came down in Genesis chapter 6 and perverted and produced the race of giants are locked up in Tartarus. Where do I get that? Well, it's in 2 Peter chapter 2. It talks about it. And when Peter uses the word hell, he's not using Sheol or Gehenna, he's using Tartarus. There were 200 of those that came down, that Satan sent down. Fallen angels. And then there is Sheol, which is Hades. And you get that in Luke chapter 16. Jesus said it's Abraham's bosom, or paradise, is separated by a great gulf between Sheol and paradise, or Abraham's bosom. Now, Abraham's bosom is now empty because Jesus came back after the resurrection and emptied it and took them all to heaven. That was the abode of all of the Old Testament saints from Adam to the day of the resurrection. And that's empty. And then on the other side is hell. Now, that's where Jesus went in and suffered 3 days and 3 nights. And when he rose, he went by the tomb and went and picked up his body and went to heaven. He met Mary Magdalene outside the tomb, remember? John chapter 20. And hell is still going. It is not empty. It's still going. But that's not the worst place for people to go. The worst place will be to the lake of fire, Gehenna. Now, where do I get Gehenna? Let's read in Mark chapter 9. And Jesus puts great emphasis on this. Anytime he mentions things 3 times in a row, you can bet he's putting emphasis on it. And it's very important. Luke 9, and we're going to chapter 42. And I've been thinking about this scripture a whole lot lately when I see what these teachers are teaching these kids in school. And when I see what TikTok and all these different things are teaching kids and perverting young kids, I think of this scripture right here. So let's read it. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he was thrown into the sea. Now, you can go back up and read the context of that, what he's talking about there. In verse 41, he says, for whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, surely I say to you, he will no means lose his reward. But then he starts warning about the offenses. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed, rather than having 2 hands to go into hell, into fire that will never be quenched. Now, in my Bible, over there where it says hell, it says Gehenna. Is that what yours says in your Bible? Who's got that in their Bible? Gehenna. And over here when it says maimed, it's also the word crippled. And then he says this in verse 41 or 44. Where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. If your foot causes you to sin, and cut it off. It's better that you enter life maimed rather than having 2 feet to be cast into hell. And that's also Gehenna. Into fire that shall never be quenched. Where what? The worm does not die, and the fire is not quenched. What he's quoting is Isaiah 66, verse 24. You can write that down, Isaiah 66, verse 24. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better you enter in the kingdom of God with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes, to be cast into hell. Gehenna, where? The worm does not die, and the fire is not quenched. Now, don't you think that's pretty important? If he mentions it 3 times in a row? Well, what I'm getting back to my point is, a lot of people in the world right now do not believe in a judgment. They don't believe in a literal hell. You know, hell is one of the doctrines of the Bible, just like the doctrine of heaven. There's the doctrine of God, the doctrine of Christ, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, the doctrine of salvation, the doctrine of heaven, the doctrine of hell, the doctrine of last things. All these are doctrines of the Bible that we have. It's called a dogma. It's what the whole Christianity is built on. These doctrines, and people think that there's, you know, I guess I'm just when I die, I'll just stop, like, you know, it'll just end. That's called annihilation. That doesn't happen. When a person dies, their spirit leaves their body, it goes someplace. It's going to go one of 2 places. Heaven or hell. And I mean immediately. Heaven or hell. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Or to be present with the devil. Now, people don't know that they think everything's just going to go on and go on. What if you was in Allen, Texas yesterday, and you went out shopping, and you were just out having a good time, and you were walking around, and all of a sudden, a person opens up shooting, and you got killed. 9 people were killed yesterday, and 15 were shot. I mean, that quick, lives were just snuffed out. And I pray every one of them was believers. See, you see what can happen? And how many of those we've been seeing lately? I mean, that's in Texas. And then you know, look at Uvalde, what happened down there. And other places where people your lives can be snuffed out real quick. So you have to always be ready to meet the Lord, and you have to also know there's a literal judgment. And what we want to do is we want to make the judgment in heaven and not at the great white throne judgment. So from the judgment into the millennial reign of Christ. So I'm going to read that. Who will enter the millennium? Who will enter the millennium? Well, let's start out here. Those who survive to the end of the tribulation and aren't cast into punishment by Christ will all be believers. Jesus, in the Olympic discourse, said, "He that shall endure unto the end, he shall be saved." And that's Matthew 24:13. The word saved in the original Greek text translates delivered, which means those who endure the frightful events of tribulation will be delivered if they survive the judgment of the nations described by Jesus in Matthew 25. Now, when we're coming to the end of the 7-year period of tribulation, remember in Zechariah, let's go to Zechariah chapter 12. Do you know where Zechariah is? It's in the Old Testament. It's the last of the minor prophets, towards the last, but it's the major of the minors. So let's look at 12 and let's look at verse 10. Now, there's a period in the tribulation when the Jewish people will look upon Christ and receive him as their Messiah. And we figure that's about midpoint of the tribulation. Verse 10. "And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as he grieves for his firstborn. In that day there will be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning at Hadad Ramon in the plain of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, every family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, and the whole house of Nathan by itself, their wives and themselves. Now, what he's talking about there, when he's reading all those, that means those are Jews. The Jewish people are going to look upon the cross of Jesus. They will see him crucified, and they will receive him as Messiah. And from that point, God is going to take that group of people, and he's going to hide them out for 3.5 years down in Petra, down in the south. So let's identify these brethren that Jesus is talking about. At the judgment of the nations, there will be 3 different groups of people. And it's over here in your handout, the 3 different groups. One is the sheep, one is the goat, and one is the brethren. The unsaved followers of Antichrist who are still alive at the end of tribulation are called goats. Matthew 25. The believers who survive are called sheep. Verses 32 and 33. The third category is brethren, whom the sheep befriend. Those whom Jesus calls, these brothers of mine are my brethren, are the Jews who go into the millennium as believers. Keep in mind that only believers will be permitted to enter the millennium. All the goats will be cast into the lake of fire. And you can see over here in your handout where this judgment will occur and who goes. The brethren is the Jews going into the millennium. The sheep nations are Gentiles. Believers will go into the millennium. Now remember this, there won't be a lot of people going into the millennium. Now when I say a lot, about maybe millions, there'll be millions. Probably not even billions, just millions. Because the world population is going to be decreased so much by the time of the end of the millennium. We know that the children of Israel will be gathered back into their land in the time of the end, which has already begun in our lifetime. 6 million Jews in Israel at the rotting and growing. Well, now we have almost 10 million. There's almost 10 million Jews back in the land. But I will tell you this. There are more Jews in New York than in Israel. And if you put the Jews in Florida and in New York, you've got about 1.5 times what's in Israel. You got over 20 million Jews in that area. Because see, a lot of those Jews that used to be in New York moved to Florida. And why have they not gone back to Israel? Well, they say that they make money and they make a lot of wealth in America, so they send it back to Israel to support the kibbutzi programs and the Jews that are in the land. There are a lot of rich Jews. It's interesting when you start studying what God has done to the Jewish people and how he blessed Jews. For example, the diamond cutters up at Haifa. Me and Linda went to the diamond factory where they cut the diamonds. Owned by Jews. The Jews own a lot of the mines over in Africa where they find these diamonds. And then they bring them back to Haifa. And then there's other, New York City has a big diamond cutting, but in Israel, it's at Haifa. And they split these diamonds, and they showed us how they split a diamond. And how they, when a diamond comes in, it's just a big rock. So to make it worth something, they have to split it and cut it and take it and make it small and polish it and do all that to get it ready to sell. And they own a lot of the diamonds. Okay, they own also a lot of the banks. Who is Goldman Sachs? Goldman Sachs, one of the largest banking in America. I saw Friday that their stock is $353 a share, and most of the U.S. banks, $12 a share. The banks of Republic Bank just got overtaken. And in that bank out there in California, the government had to sweep up and take care of that. And a lot of the banks now, I think J.P. Morgan might be $129 a share. It's one of the bigger ones. But Goldman Sachs blows them. And then there used to be Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers, that's a Jewish, but it's no longer in business, thanks to Barack Obama. He basically put that one out of business in 2008 and 9 because of the banking crisis that we had. We had a crisis, if you remember that, 2008 and 9, that was a bad time. So Jews own a lot. What about the Rothschilds? You ever heard of the Rothschilds over in Europe? They were the biggest bankers in the world. The Rothschilds. So even in the days in World War II when Hitler came to power, the Jews had the big mansions. They owned the banks. They had cars. Their kids went to the best universities. And Hitler went out and says, those Jews down there are causing all of the German problems. And what we need to do is get rid of those Jews. And that's how he turned the German people against the Jews. He even used the writings of Martin Luther in Martin Luther's latter days about the Jews. And he put them in the newspaper. And the German people just allowed those Nazis to go in and take them off into captivity and take them to these ovens and concentration camps. And then at the end of the war, Eisenhower rounded them all up, the Jewish leaders. I mean, the German leaders. And the German people said, we didn't know anything was going on. Well, they knew when the Gestapo came in and arrested all the Jews and took them off into the concentration camps. They saw the trains leaving Berlin. They saw the trains leaving these big cities full of cattle cars of Jews on them. The Jews were getting the curse that they pronounced upon themselves when they said, give us Barabbas and crucify him and let his blood be upon us and our generations. That's when the curse came upon them. But now, they are back in the land. We will be talking Wednesday night on the 75th anniversary of the birth of Israel. And that is May the 14th, 1948 to May the 14th, 2023. 75 years. And that's very important in the timing of God. That many Jewish people will receive the Lord is seen in Ezekiel 11:19, when the Lord takes away their hearts of stone and puts a new spirit within them, a heart of flesh. This is also seen in Ezekiel 18:31. When will this take place? Right after the Antichrist desecrates the temple of Jerusalem, the Jews will become so disillusioned that they will turn to the Messiah and flee into the wilderness of Petra, where they will be preserved supernaturally for 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. And there God nourishes them for the last 3.5 years of tribulation. These and all the other surviving Jews will probably include the 144,000 witnesses of Revelation 7, are believers who the Lord calls brethren. Now those 144,000 will already have been into heaven, because Jesus is going to take them out of the earth when they finish their mission. they'll operate for about 3.5 years, and then he's going to take them out of the earth, and they will go to heaven. Thus we see that only believers will enter the millennium. Gentile believers and Jewish believers, from whom the whole house of Israel. So next week what we'll do, we'll start talking about the millennium itself. What will be happening in the millennium, who will be there, and the aspects of the millennium, and what will it be like? Because we're going to be there ruling and reigning for 1,000 years, so we need to know about it. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Next week we will talk about the key events of the millennium and the millennium. And also join us down in the next service on renewing your mind. Thank you, and God bless you.